team members here from various aspects of the industry. I want to respect everyone's time today, so I'm going to say I'm Maria Sweeney and I work in the Canadian side of CLE, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion with experts coming from the US side of our organization and various people who've been, like Jeffrey and Haley, who've been generous enough to give us their time and join us today to provide their skills and expertise as well. So we are going to start right at the top with business development, and we have Grant Emhoff. Grant, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone, give them a little bit of information about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Marie. Yeah, my name is Grant Emhoff. I'm based out of Oakland, California, and I'm part of the cannabis license experts team. I'm more so help with like regulatory specific to the US, as well as helping with some of more of the project management and understanding what it looks like when we're going into each state. I've been working in cannabis licensing since California moved over to adult use, and from there have had an opportunity to work in many of different states, medical and adult use.
Excellent. So let's start with question number one for today. What insurance coverage is required by regulators?
Yeah, so right now, as most of you probably know, in New York, we're still waiting for some of that final regulation to come down. And, a lot of those pieces of exactly what's going to be required will be pending that. However, we can take a look at some of the other states to get an idea of what a typical insurance looks like for cannabis businesses. So, generally we see a general liability insurance, product liability insurance, property insurance. So for more like comprehensive insurance plans, there's like excess liability insurance as well as workers' compensation as well. And if you get down to more detailed and you have an internet presence and you're storing data, cyber liability as well. Now, looking at like cultivation, obviously there's more specific insurances for specific functions within the supply chain. You're going to want to look for something more like crop insurance, which is generally a lot easier to do if you have an indoor facility. But most of the time, you could get a comprehensive plan to cover that. And then also your property insurance is very important as well when you're talking about something like a manufacturing or a cultivation facility. And then specific to manufacturing, you want equipment breakdown insurance because you're going to be running equipment quite a lot. So those are kind of what we see. Some of those other pieces I would say are more comprehensive, but it's better to go more than what the state wants so that you can cover, pieces of your supply chain as well and what you're doing internally.
Excellent. Okay, and you mentioned electronics and technology. So do I need to electronically file my sales and use tax returns with the state tax authority?
So New York has basically put out information saying that anybody who sells tangible personal property in any business would, yes, need to register with the tax department and then obtain a certificate of authority. Therefore, then you'd have to collect your tax and submit your tax, respectively. Specific to cannabis, what this means is as an adult use retailer or distributor, you're going to need to do this. So you're going to need to sign on, create that page after you've received your license, and file quarterly tax returns showing the total amount of tax due and for each quarter. And then also, even if you have no sales during that quarter, by the 20th of each day, 20th of each month at the end of the quarter, you're going to need to submit those.
Okay. Now we've covered the boring and dry that nobody likes to do, but everybody has to do. When planning, how do I set my dispensary apart from others?
Yeah, definitely. So, there's a lot of different ways that, if you're in a retail position that you can attract customers as well as create programs to bring more customers in. So loyalty programs are one way of doing this. We see this in general retail as well. New customer discounts and specials are very good. These are all, I would say, more from the promotional marketing side of things. But one thing I think is extremely important as dispensaries and, as an industry that is has a lot of troubled past with, how it's been criminalized, is going and creating local and community efforts and being part of that local community. There's no better way to get to know an area and an area to get to know who you are as a business by putting forward efforts that can promote the local community, whether that's, putting together events, whether that's creating some sort of mural partnership and helping local artists, but, really finding ways to bring up the local community from a beautification standpoint or development standpoint will set apart your business from other businesses in the area.
Excellent. Okay, so I have one more question for you, and then we're going to move on to Daryn. How do I establish a strong supply chain relationship? I know that might be a loaded question, but I know it's definitely at the forefront of a lot of people's minds at the moment.
Yeah, it just really depends upon where you are in the space, what license you hold. But a good way for dispensaries to create a good relationship with other pieces of the supply chain, whether that's manufacturers or cultivators, is creating shelf space. Every brand wants to be upfront with shelf space. So allotting that to some of the businesses and some of these companies that you want to align yourself with and have a really healthy relationship, that's going to allow customers to see that, keep all of your distributors happy as they're coming in and seeing their products and on that shelf. The other piece that I think is extremely important, specific to New York, because we don't have vertical integration, except for an extremely limited way of doing it, is white labeling. So, a lot of other states, especially here in California, what a lot of businesses do is they have a vertical integration that allows them to have their own brand, an in-house brand for the dispensary. One way of doing this that would be specific to New York is just creating a white labeling within your cultivation type of thing so that you can partner with a dispensary and they would have a certain allotment within of plants within your facility. That I think that helps create continuity. It also creates a stronger relationship between the supplier and then the dispensary at that level. And then the third piece I'd say is super important, which is very obvious to, I think, just retail in general, is incentivizing sales. So as a retailer, incentivizing through promotions, and as a supplier, incentivizing through discounts for larger sales and for continued shelf space.
Thank you very much, Grant. Now we're going to move on to Daryn Chandler Jr. Daryn, would you like to introduce yourself to the group, please, and just give them a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Daryn Chandler Jr. I am president and co-founder of Premium Genetics. Premium Genetics is a cultivation company that was recently awarded by New Jersey. I am also director of cannabis real estate at Ripco Real Estate. Ripco Real Estate is one of the most successful independent real estate companies in the tri-state area. Specifically, my division, the cannabis division, we work in 5 states. So all we do is help operators find that coveted green zone property to do their, whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, retail operations in different states. It's been difficult, but yeah.
I get that. Okay, so let's move right into some of the questions that we know people have been looking for answers from you for. Mm-hmm. So first would be, what are local and political risks in choosing a location for my cannabis business?
Local and political risk, you said?
Yes.
Well, the risk I would say is picking a property that's not accurately zoned. Then really you're just wasting money at that point. So really the political aspect of it, most likely you have to find the property that's zoned and you have to meet all their criteria. Specifically speaking, New Jersey and most other places, you have to meet the municipality, the town, the city, whatever, the state is calling it, their requirements. So I've seen in a lot of cases, people identify locations, start paying for a rent, and they haven't gone through the political game. They haven't gone through the application process. They haven't identified if that property was zoned, and it ends up being a waste of money.
Okay. Yes, we saw that a lot up here as well in our recreational rolled out. Okay, so knowing that we have some investors on watching as well today, what are key things that investors should be aware of in terms of buying a building or state rules around zoning? I know you did just kind of touch on that a little bit, but is there any keys or points that you think investors might need to be more highly aware of?
Well, yeah, again, you want to make sure that property is zoned, or that if you can get a variance for that property, specifically like for New York, a lot of the regulations are still kind of coming out, so you don't really know what the zonings are. But I would say, look at your history, right? Look at how they zone medical, and 9 out of 10 times they're going to kind of emulate the medical market and really be less restrictive than the medical market. So that's a good foundation to look on. But yeah, to me, it just really comes down to zoning. If you specifically are looking for that property to be a cannabis real estate investment, then it has to meet that requirement of being zoned for that particular use. Then, more things is, are you buying it cash? Are you mortgaging it? Then is your mortgage okay? Your lender, okay with, it being a cannabis operation? You want to have that conversation as well. So yeah, I would say those are the two main issues. Make sure that property is zoned, and how are you doing your financing, whether cash or you're financing it, and does your financier operate with cannabis businesses?
Now, this is more of a general one, but what are common questions that you get when people are interested in investing or getting involved in this industry?
I mean, it's a lot of, how to put it, still reefer madness. So to me, it doesn't matter if it was McDonald's or a cannabis shop. Like, it's just real estate and it's just commerce. But a lot of people that are completely foreign to cannabis, that's like a big fear. Trust me, I'm going through it right now in New Jersey, where I'm negotiating with a landlord, and he has all these preconceived notions in his head. It's like, no, it's not that. It's just like if you had a coffee shop. It's normal business. So I really think that's kind of like the issue that I'm trying to overcome with a lot of just typical landlords. And then it just comes out of the generic stuff, like, a lot of people are really into the business for the retail side. So it's like, how big should my space be? How much money should I budget to do my design of the store? And then for the industrial, it's a much bigger number. Now it comes, how long is my construction going to be on a bigger property? So those are kind of the top questions that I get in the space.
So kind of best ways to prepare for what they're getting themselves into.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm probably going to circle back with a few more questions in a moment, Daryn, but I'm going to move on to Jeffrey to give us some legal insights as well. All right, Jeffrey, so let's start with, what is the difference between the Justice-Involved Individual, or JII, designation required for the Conditional Adult Use Recreational Dispensary license, that's a mouthful, and the Social and Economic Equity or Equity Applicant designation, which will be sorry, someone has spelled this wrong, which will be in domain for the 9 standard licenses.
Sure. So this is a point of pretty extreme confusion, particularly now that we're in the application process for this conditional adult use retail dispensary license. And a lot of people are conflating a justice-involved individual with a social and economic equity applicant. And these are two very different things and are very differently relevant to two very different licenses. So the license that the application is open for right now is this conditional adult use retail dispensary license. In order to qualify, the primary qualification is that the individual had to be convicted of a cannabis crime or arrested for a cannabis crime and convicted of a crime out of that same transaction before March 31st, 2021, here in the state of New York. And it doesn't matter if you were white, black, Hispanic, male, female, Indian, Southeast Asian, Vietnam, wherever you're from, which may be a social and economic equity applicant designation. For these justice-involved individuals, those criteria are not relevant to whether or not an individual qualifies. So again, the justice-involved individuals is anyone that has been convicted of a crime like what I described before, and they can also demonstrate they're a 10% owner of a business that was profitable for any 2 years of its existence. Now, for social and economic equity applicants, that is a germane terminology for the later licenses that will be coming, as we call the 9 standard licenses that are available in the cannabis law. And we're still waiting, as has been noted previously on today's call, that we are still waiting for the regulations that will be related to those 9 standard licenses. But we do know that applicants will be able to designate themselves appropriately as social and economic equity applicants for those 9 standard licenses. And those will be things such as minority-owned business, woman-owned business. Incidentally, it's interesting, there's a minority woman-owned business category, which is separate from those other 2. Additionally, service-disabled veterans, distressed farmers, and then a final category, which is going to be the most difficult, I think, for the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM to deal with, which is going to be people that lived in communities that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis and had an income below a certain threshold. I think the other categories that I mentioned, it'll be very much easier to identify specifically who those candidates are or applicants are, and get proof of their status as social and economic equity applicants. I do think that 6th one is going to be a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult, but I'm sure the OCM will figure that out. But for those applicants, they're going to have a host of benefits in the application process. So half the licenses are going to be made available to social and economic equity applicants. At least that's the goal set forth in the law. These applicants are going to have lower, reduced, and perhaps waived licensing fees. There will eventually be a loan pool, and these applicants will be able to get low or no interest loans from that loan pool. And additionally, what was mentioned before, I think Daryn did a great job of explaining how he's had clients that sat with leases for months on end until they were able to operate. One great thing for the social and economic equity applicants is in their application, they do not have to demonstrate a right to property, which would either be ownership of the property or, as Daryn had said previously, a lease for that property. They only will have to show a plan to get a right to property. So it'll be sufficient to say, I've talked to a landlord and the landlord has agreed to lease me this property if I get a license. That will pass muster for a social and economic equity applicant, whereas it would not pass muster for a standard applicant. So again, that is kind of the differences between the JIIs, the justice-involved individuals, and the social and economic equity applicants. And I think it's something that there's a lot of confusion about, and hopefully this will help folks kind of get their heads around what's going on there. I believe you're muted. There we go.
And we're back. Sorry about that. I was going to say, I'm a huge fan of what's happening down there in terms of the equity programs. It's definitely something that people north of the border could be taking some good lessons on. And I do hope that we do see them as well. Okay, so moving on to our next question, Jeffrey. Do the recipients of this first round of conditional adult use retail dispensary license have to use the DASNY spaces, or can we use our own if we don't need the funds?
Correct. So this is another question that there was a lot of confusion about because we got a lot of signs for the correct answer, which are, at least initially, these justice-involved individuals that are applying for this first license will have to use the DASNY spaces. Those will be spaces that the state will build to be used as dispensaries. There was some confusing guidance that came out of the OCM right at the end of the process, where there was some confusing responses to some of the contents, where it indicated perhaps these applicants would not have to use these spaces. They then made it very clear from the OCM, and Chris Alexander at the OCM has made it very clear that it is their intention, and at least the way things will work at the beginning here, is that if you are applying for this very first conditional adult use retail dispensary license, and DASNY, the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, and the fund, and the OCM and the CCB, if they want you in one of these state spaces, you will have to be in one of those state spaces. So that is indeed what it looks like now, despite some of the confusing guidance. Although let's be very clear, the OCM and the Cannabis Control Board have made it very clear that they are running the show here and that they can change guidance at any time. I think for those of you that are filling out the application, you know that literally the morning the application opened, they changed the NAICS code. That's the NAICS code that they want everybody to use related to their application. So they may change things at any moment here, but at least that's what we believe the guidance is at this point.
Thank you, because I know there has been a lot of confusion around that and probably
Absolutely.
still will be moving forward.
Probably.
Okay,
yes.
so next, does an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal qualify someone as a JII for the purposes of CAURD?
So this is something else that has been a great point of confusion. I can't tell you how many people have come to me thinking this is their great moment in the sun with their ACDs, only to learn that an ACD is indeed not a conviction. And so what that means is very often here when people were arrested in the state of New York for low-level cannabis offenses, when they went before the judge would say, okay, you're not going to plead guilty today. We're not going to try you. We're going to have no finding of whether or not you're convicted today. In fact, we're going to adjourn for today. And that's the first word, the adjournment. And we're going to wait a year. And if you've behaved and everything goes well for the year and I don't see you here again, then we're going to dismiss your case. No conviction, no nothing. And so that's the adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. And as you can imagine, when people got arrested 5, 10, 15 years ago, this was their dream. The best case for their case would be that they would get an ACD and it would be dismissed and nothing would happen on their record going forward. Now that we fast forwarded a couple of years and New York has this new license, all of these people are now wishing they had been convicted. And I'm being a little facetious. No one ever wishes that they had been convicted, but it is the case that in order to qualify for this first license, you had to either be convicted of that cannabis crime or arrested for that cannabis crime and convicted of something else. If the entire disposition of your case was this ACD, this adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, you were never convicted of a cannabis crime or for that matter, any crime, if that is the only thing that happened, this ACD, and therefore you would not qualify under the guidance that the OCM has provided and the CCB has provided for this first license. You have to have either a conviction of cannabis or a conviction of something else that led from that cannabis arrest. So if you don't have one of those two convictions, you are not eligible for this very first license.
Thank you. Okay. And do the convicted individuals and profitable business owner have to be the same person for the purposes of CAURD?
Yes, they do. So this was another very confusing part. I've had some people that say I'm the convicted person and here's my partner that has the 2-year profitable business. And unfortunately, that does not work. The conviction and the profitable business or the relationship to the conviction and the profitable business have to be in the same person. So the person that was convicted can apply. It has to have been their business, or the parent or child of the convicted person is also eligible. So if they were applying, it would have to be their eligible business. But you can't split it up between people. And as an additional side note, I've had some people that had a couple of businesses and they had one profitable year in each business and they wanted to do it across the businesses. And that's not allowed either. It has to be 2 years of profitability in one business. Now, they don't have to be the last 2 years, and also they don't have to be 2 contiguous years. It can be any 2 years, but it does have to be 2 years in the same business, and the business has to have been 10% at a minimum owned by the person that is applying as the applicant. Most oftenly, the person who was convicted, but it could also be their parent or their child or dependent.
Okay, and I believe I have one more question for you, which is, what is a true person of interest?
Sure. True person of interest, as everyone knows, us attorneys love using the initials for these types of things, so we call it a TPI. And a true person of interest is an individual as defined in a cannabis application here in New York that we're going to need a lot of information for, and who also will not be able to get other cannabis licenses. So a true person of interest, as defined for this first license that people are applying for, is a shareholder or a member of the LLC or an officer of the corporation, a person that has a right to any revenue coming out of that entity. There's a whole host of people that are applicable under this TPI designate. And when you make this application, you're just going to have to provide a whole host of information about each of these TPIs, you know, all of their bank accounts, all of the stock holdings they have, a lot of their history. Have they ever been convicted of any crimes? So these are just the individuals that are going to have to provide a lot more information in the application. These are individuals that are not going to be able to hold other cannabis licenses. So if you're applying for this conditional adult use retail dispensary license, you can't already have one of the conditional cultivation or conditional processing licenses in the state. And incidentally, it's very interesting. They are considering the spouses of any of the people that meet those criteria that I mentioned previously are also TPIs. So if you're married and have a spouse and you're a shareholder or a member of the LLC, your spouse is also considered a TPI and will also need to fill out the required disclosure documents and tax information releases for tax and finance to release everything they have about you to the OCM. So the TPI is a very important person. It's very critical that you review all of the classes of individuals that are potentially a TPI. I just listed a few of them. And the spouse one is the one that is most catching people off guard. They're not used to having to do that type of disclosure for their spouse. But in this situation, you will have to. And that is very important for this license. And I'm sure we'll see similar types of designates for the future licenses that are coming.
Yes, I know that actually just took a couple people on the panel off guard as well. I saw some shocked looking faces. That for those of us who've licensed up in north of the border, that is not that big of a surprise. We've had to do that for many, many years now. But yes,
Yep.
we do still have.
And that is common for other types of licenses that are really heavily regulated. Just this is one that I don't think people were too in tune with yet about cannabis.
Yeah, we're all usually worried about ourselves and just thinking, you know, it's just something to support our families with. But yes, they do look into all of it. Okay, so thank you very much, Jeffrey. I am going to have some follow-up questions for you, I am sure, at the end of the hour. But we are going to move on to Anthony Winston III, who is going to speak to us on some engineering questions. Anthony, did you want to give a little bit of an introduction into yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I am the owner and principal engineer for Winston Engineering. The company was started about 7 years ago, but we've been in the cannabis space since 2017. We provide mechanical, which is HVAC, and then electrical, plumbing, and civil engineering for indoor cultivation, extraction, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. So essentially, anything that's in a building, we can provide the engineer and construction permit plans. We're an international firm now. We operate in multiple states, including a few provinces in Canada. We also have a huge push to help social equity organizations from across the US. I donate my time regularly to assist their membership with understanding the engineering side of construction. I think you're on mute.
Hey, Marie, I think you're muted right now.
Sorry, my headphones went out again, as they typically do. So we're just going to stop that. But sorry about that, Anthony. Do I need to submit a floor plan during the application process? And does this need to be certified by an architect or an engineer?
It depends. So I think during the preliminary design for your application, I believe just a regular floor plan is okay. But once you start getting into construction docs, you absolutely need to start with a licensed architect to draw up, stamp your plans, and then it comes to it's to us, and then we overlay our MEP, so mechanical, electrical, plumbing, our MEP components over that, and then you submit to building and safety. And then once you go back and forth with rounds of comments and everything looks good to the city, then the contractor pulls the permit and then they go build it. And that's across the board, whether you're doing a TI, which is a tenant improvement. So you moved into an existing building and you're revamping it for your use, or if it's a ground up facility. I think you got it. Oh, you're muted again.
Okay, I'm just not going to mute it anymore. But loaded question, how big of an electrical service or how much power do I need to be running into my operation, regardless if it's a dispensary, cultivation? It is loaded, I know.
So dispensary is easy. Dispensary is really just a retail spot, right? And it really depends on the size. Typical facility, let's say, I don't know, 3,000 square foot dispensary, you're probably looking at a 200 amp, 208 volt, 3-phase system, which is relatively small when you talk about commercial space. Once you get into cultivation, there are so many things that you have to take into account. Your HVAC system, right? Depending on how much of your space is dedicated towards cultivation, because if you have a 10,000 square foot canopy, you're not going to get a 9,000. If you have a 10,000 square foot building, you're not going to go and have 9,000 square feet of cultivation, right? You want to have room for support spaces and things like that, which aren't very HVAC heavy. It also depends on where you live. We've done projects from West Coast to East Coast. So you have to take into account your different humidity. You have to take into account your weather, right? So there's a lot of things that go into how much HVAC you actually need, which is going to be a huge driving force for the amount of power that you need. And then also lighting. Now everybody's getting on board with LED. In California, they're about to, Title 24 is their energy, kind of their energy conservation rules, right? Where you're going to have to use LED. In New York, I'm not sure if they have that yet, but if you're using high pressure sodium lights, they consume a lot more power than LED. I'm going to try to convince you to use LED just because, I'm a tree hugger at heart, but it really just depends on what the grower's preference is, unless the law takes over.
Okay, and you touched on it a little bit in your response to the last question, but how much HVAC do I really need?
So that's a strange question. So when I got into the cannabis industry, we incorrectly treated a cultivation facility just like any other building. I didn't have a conversation with the growers. We just went and sat huddled in our little office space, did the calculations and spit out a tonnage. Well, the grower came back and was like, what the hell are you doing? I've been growing for 20 years. And in these particular rooms, we do 5 tons and we grow just fine. So we rely heavily on the grower, their preference, which a lot of times is driven by the strain that they use, right? So that also takes into account humidity, because certain plants transpire at a different rate. So you might need a lot more dehumidification than a different strain. So it's really kind of a back and forth with what they call master grower. Everybody calls himself a master grower, but it really takes into account what their preference is. But in terms of non-cannabis space, you have no say in that, because that comes down to human safety. And as licensed engineers, we dictate that. Now we will give our recommendations on the cultivation area, saying, hey, I know you want this level of HVAC and humidity, but there might be some issues. You're going to sign this document stating that we're not responsible for your plants dying, but we're going to follow your lead in the cultivation area.
Okay, so it's really about working in partnership with your clients to make sure that they're getting what they want as well as what they need.
Absolutely. It's definitely an interesting balance and a tightrope walk, if you will.
Okay. So I have one more question before moving on. And again, this is a bit of a loaded one. I'm sorry, I keep throwing loaded questions at you today, Anthony, but is it more cost effective to retrofit an existing building for my business or to build a new one?
Whoa. Yeah,
and I know that's a loaded question. So is it easy? It might be easier to address it as, are there certain considerations when someone's looking at buildings that might eliminate them from a retrofit? I don't know if
So
that's a little easier to
I,
address.
I think geography will play a huge part of it. Land in California is a lot more expensive than, let's say, if you're doing work in the South or rural areas of New York. So that's really going to be the driving force, is your land, because that's going to really benefit or screw up your ROI. So you have to take that into account. And now with material costs going up, you're going to have to take that into account. The supply chain is all screwed up, so you got to take that into account. So I think the least past the resistance is to find a warehouse that fits your need for your cultivation facility, and then kind of take that route. But yeah, new build can be tough. I've done projects where we're looking at something in, I think it's Alabama, and they're going to do a metal tilt-up building, which is going to be really cheap. So it just really depends. I'm sure Daryn has some say in land costs as well.
Daryn, did you want to throw in any comments on that one as well?
I just think his assessment was spot on. It really comes to the region. Like I said, land in California is going to be significantly more expensive than land in Alabama. So that's really where it factors into. It's the region, and then again, supply. I think retrofitting the building is probably the better course of action, as long as it kind of is close to where you need the finished product to be.
Thank you both on that one. Now we're going to move into the ladies of the panel today and kind of get your expertise. We're going to start with Haley Glover. She's here to speak on some security concerns that people may have. Haley, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Haley Glover. I'm the Senior Security Consultant with Sapphire Risk Advisory Group. We have done work in 35 states, completed over 70 build-outs. So some pretty solid experience in the cannabis security world. But yeah, I mean, we're excited to get started in New York. We have already worked with a few of the hemp operators that are now doing cannabis. And so, yeah.
Okay. So let's start with, what are some of the unique security problems of the cannabis industry?
Well, it is a high-risk industry. What we've seen so far in New York, for example, is for the cultivators, they are in some more of the rural areas, and the option for power or internet for their security systems has been pretty limited. So it has created quite a challenge. Your traditional dispensary, the biggest concern is going to be really what quality of equipment you're having installed. Do you know how to use it? Do you know how to test it? So anything that's going to be high risk like this is really just going to be crucial for you to hire the right people who understand what you need to protect your business. So something we've done for one of the New York operators is we have utilized a surveillance system that is really meant for these areas that really don't have much power or internet to go off of and can still meet what the regulations require.
Sorry, the studio next to me is super loud today. Let me think, what's another good question? So how much security does a cannabis business need? What types of activities within their business do they need to be considering? Something like inventory tracking or digital records, maybe product security?
All the above. So when I come in and I'm doing a design for a dispensary, for example, we implement alarms, access control, surveillance systems. We'll provide guidance on the correct safe that you should be using and the secured storage. Safes, for example, that is something where we see a lot of gun safes. Gun safes are for guns, not for cannabis, not for cash. So that's something we like to stress a lot. With the alarms, access control, and surveillance systems, you're required to test your system semi-annually. I recommend doing it once a month because you never know when something might go down and you don't notice it. If you wait that 6 months, that's pretty bad. So getting ahead of that, doing those tests. And then you're also required to keep those records for 5 years. If you have commercial grade systems, then those should automatically keep those records so that if you get audited at any point in time, you can already see, okay, this is when we performed this test and this is who did it. This is all the devices that were tested during that process. And that's easy to hand over. Same thing with inventory tracking.
Which leads me to my next question. What track and trace system should I have in place for compliance and reporting?
So for New York, it's BioTrack, but anything that's compatible with it, so like Dutchie, Kova, that'll work just as well.
And what level of security clearance do my cannabis businesses require?
This is a tough one, and this is one where I would normally refer someone like Jeffrey over. Some states, they will do a criminal background check. I believe in New York, it's going to be a case-by-case basis on what that background check consists of. If it's something kind of like the social equity program where you were convicted of a cannabis crime, that's one thing. But if you were convicted of selling to a minor, I believe that would be something extremely different. But on the internal side of best practices, I would say just go through a thorough vetting process. I mean, this is somebody who is working in your business on a day-to-day basis, and you want to make sure that those are people that you can trust and that they're handling your product and cash properly, and that there's no internal theft potential down the road if you can prevent it.
Treat your plants like your babies. It's really what it comes to.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I know that in the chat, I have a few more questions for you as well. So I'm going to move on to Jenna and regulatory, and then we'll get to the chat and start addressing some individual questions that have come in over the last hour. So Jenna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yes, I'm Jenna Rumpel. I'm a licensing and regulatory specialist for CLE. So essentially I help businesses through the licensing process to get them set up and help them determine what they need for their applications all the way through licensure, and advise them what they can and cannot do under their license and the requirements that they need to follow and the ongoing regulatory requirements that they need to stay compliant.
Okay, so let's start with the very top of the list. How do I get a CAURD license?
Yes, so right now the CAURD licenses, there are two pathways. It's the qualifying business route and a qualifying nonprofit route. The qualifying business route, Jeffrey touched on a little bit already. You need to be a justice-involved individual or the spouse, legal guardian, dependent of a justice-involved individual with qualifying business experience, as a 10% owner that showed net profits for at least 2 years. You need to have sole control over the application, over the business, to the direct control over the management operations, and a significant presence in New York, so assets, residency, or some other kind of tie to New York. That's for the qualifying business route. That person also needs to be a 30% owner of the overall license. And the license itself needs to be owned by a majority of justice-involved individuals, so 51% ownership. You can have multiple people on there, but the person who has this qualifying business qualifications needs to own 30%. The qualifying nonprofit route, the nonprofit organization needs to fulfill certain requirements, such as what their mission is of the organization, working with incarcerated individuals, things like that. They also need to have a justice-involved individual board member or officer, someone on the organization, 5 full-time employees, a social enterprise, which is a business that generates revenue and also that serves customers and also serves the overall mission of their organization. And sole control as well, which is directing the management of the business. This organization needs to own 30% of the overall license as well. 51% can be owned by a combination of nonprofits and justice-involved individuals, but the qualifying nonprofit needs to own 30%. So those are the two routes right now. And then sometime in the future, it will open up to general applicants who don't need to fulfill those qualifications.
Excellent. So what documents do the qualifying people need to apply for their CAURD license?
Yes, so there are a number of documents and information you'll need to pull together. First and foremost, showing that you have the marijuana conviction. That can be court documents, documentation, court certificate disposition, a rap sheet, some kind of arrest record, showing that you had that conviction of the marijuana arrest or of another offense that you also were arrested for but didn't get convicted for the marijuana charges specifically. If you're applying as the relative of the person, you'll need to provide a birth certificate or marriage certificate, some kind of documentation that shows that you are the spouse or legal guardian to the person who has the marijuana conviction. They'll also need to provide some residency documentation, leases, utility bills, driver's licenses, things like that, showing where they were living at the time they were arrested. And these need to be no later than 180 days from the time that the arrest took place. Other documents you'll need to show are the license applicant's business organizational documents, of disclosing all the officers and shareholders, stockholders, things like that. Tax records to show the qualifying business profits and the owners had 10% ownership and whatnot, as well as disclosure forms for the true party of interest persons. And after you submit and you get applied and you get approved, there'll be another additional documents that will come later, such as business continuity plans and things like that, but that will be at a later time.
So in typical government fashion, do it once, do it twice, do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So once someone's kind of got all their documentation together, what licenses are available and how do you know what you're eligible for?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the CAURD licenses are open until the end of September to apply. The conditional adult use for manufacturing, that application cycle actually ends today for existing licensees that were licensed under the Department of Agriculture and Markets Industrial Hemp and Research Pilot Program. So they will be eligible for a manufacturing license to help get some product out to dispensaries once they're open. The cultivation cycle ended earlier this year in June, and testing labs will be available sometime in the future so that they can get tested product out to dispensaries so that they can start selling tested products that are safe for consumption once those dispensaries open. And if you're not eligible for anything right now, there will be additional licenses in the future for on-site consumption and more retail and delivery and things like that. And right now, I would say just to help, if you're eligible, a good resource is working with experienced consultants such as CLE. They can review all of your documentation. They can see if you actually fit the requirements or not, see if you need any additional materials to apply, to kind of have the oversight and overall review and analysis of it and see what you need and see if you actually are eligible for it.
Perfect. So it sounds again like the partnerships that people are establishing as they're preparing are important and coming up once again.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've covered quite a bit of information today. Jen, I do have two more quick questions. You've touched on them a little bit already, but maybe just expand on them for a moment or two. But once applications are open to the general public, how can I be best prepared to approach the application process and set my team apart from other applicants?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of things you can do right now. Seeing what they're asking for this application cycle, we can see what they're looking for. They want people who are going to be set up for success, who have experience either in the cannabis industry or operating a successful business that is similar to running a dispensary or the type of license type that you're going to be applying for. Getting your business plans together is something that you can start on and making them really, really strong with those plans and financial projections. You can start the property search. That is a big hurdle for a lot of applicants. So getting that started in municipalities that have opted in for retail or looking in for the license type that you are applying for. You can get that started because that's something that's going to take quite a bit of time. Again, working with groups like CLE, we can help prepare those business plans and make sure that they are really strong to set you apart. They want to see businesses that have ties to the community, that are going to be contributing to communities that have been, disproportionately impacted by marijuana prohibition. So developing plans and what your contributions will be, just to make it stand out above others, is something that you can start preparing now and getting those things together.
Thank you very much. We've covered a lot of information in 51.5 minutes, but I'm going to take a look in the chat and see where we might be able to provide a little bit more information or a little bit more clarity. The first one I have, I think, is best directed towards Jeffrey. He's still online with us. If not, someone else can hop in. But can parents be considered TPIs of applicants?
Yes. So particularly for this initial conditional adult use retail dispensary license, there are a variety of individuals that qualify as to be an applicant, not just the person that was convicted, but their parents, their children, dependents. There's a whole cast of characters that are eligible to apply under that license, and it's all very clear in Part 116, which is the regulation. You can just read the list there of all of the relationships that would qualify one for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for expanding on that one. Now let's see. Just had a really good one. All right, so this one is pertaining to advertising and marketing, but are there full listings of any of the prohibited words or pictures allowed for New York's images and advertising in the cannabis space? And
so as of right now, we have the draft regulations that are put out. So we have, the idea of what we can expect for advertising and labeling. However, this hasn't been finalized. So, if you have questions after this, reach out to one of us here and we can send you that those regulations. And if there's any more specifics into that, we can definitely go over that. Once those final regulations come out, though, we'll have a full idea of what this is going to look like from packaging and labeling.
Thank you very much, Grant. Now this is coming from Andrew. Let me see. Are there any draft labeling regulations that have been posted at this stage of the process?
So just reiterating what I said before, this draft has been put out. I believe it was put out towards the end of July, early mid-August. So it is out there right now. And so that's just a draft. And encourage you to go look at that. It's directly on the OCM's website.
All right. Let's see. For Daryn, what are some of the most common pitfalls during site constructions?
Anthony kind of mentioned it before, the supply chain. So like upgrading your power, depending on where you're at, like in New Jersey, for instance, mayor's going to take like a year for power generators to increase the power of your facility. So small things like that taken into account can really just hold up your entire process. So yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest things.
So definitely all in the tiny details.
If I could touch on that too.
Oh, please do.
One major thing that we see is that you'll rely on your contractor, or let's say, in this example, an electrical contractor who deviates from the engineering plans without telling anybody. And so they submit the inspector comes out, looks at our plans, looks at what was done, and they don't match. So now you got to spend weeks, sometimes months, getting those plans revised, because us as engineers, we're not sitting on our hands, right, waiting for you to come back for something. We got other projects. And so that could delay not only getting the engineering done, but then you have to have the inspector come out, and depending on where you are, he or she cannot just come out at a moment's notice. So now you're waiting on that, and then you got to make any field changes if possible. Like, we do our very best to limit those field changes, but sometimes you got to start ripping things out, and only thing we can do is look at the client and say, I'm sorry, but they deviated. So it's all, make sure that your contractors are talking with your engineers throughout the whole process.
Communication and partnerships, once again, coming for the win on how to be prepared. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's see. We do have one question here about selling online. We've got somebody looking into what are the regulations that are published to date, or any drafts that are to date about selling edibles and the delivery methods, whether we're allowed to have online dispensaries in New York, etc.
Yeah, I can take this one and start it up, and I'm sure everybody here has something to say specifically about this one. But if your intention is to produce edibles in your home and then drop ship or USPS or do an online store where you're doing that, that is not allowed through basically any cannabis related program right now in the United States. If you're looking to create a delivery service where you could deliver products directly to consumers, that is, there's a pathway for licensure that way. THC products, because USPS is a federally run service, it cannot go through that. UPS and FedEx, other companies, still policy-wise do not accept that. So you cannot have a purely online business where you would produce and then ship edible-based products that have THC in them.
Okay, and just from a north of the border perspective, when it comes to New York, a lot of this sounds very similar to what the regulations are throughout Ontario and Quebec. Are they doing that because of the proximity of the border? Are they taking that into account? Or are they just saying, we are our own area and these are our rules and this is what we want?
So because it's federally illegal right now at a country level in the US, that's why anything that would be federal, like USPS, how are they going to stop this from going over a border, something like that? So you have to keep it local, and everything is, siphoned specifically to the state which it exists in. So if it has THC product, if it's something that's created through the licensed cannabis, industry, it stays within that state. And even if it's going to be within that state, you can't ship something that would be a federally shipping service to go within the state. So that's why we see, even in California, delivery companies do not ship things. They have a physical delivery driver go there. The other piece of that is you have to guarantee somebody is of the age. So you have to show ID. FedEx, USPS generally don't do that. Marie, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we're closing in on an hour here. I would like to get some closing thoughts from each person before we round off today. I do want to respect everyone's time. So let's start in reverse. Let's start with Jenna. If there's any one thing you want someone to take away today, what would that be?
One thing to take away is you get prepared, have a knowledgeable, experienced team on hand to help you through the process, whether it's from the very beginning, from property search all the way to the application phase and beyond when you have your license. It's a heavily regulated industry, so there's a lot of requirements and everything that you need to follow, and you don't want anything putting your license and your business in jeopardy. So having a good team, compliance team on hand is essential.
Thank you. And Haley, what is the one takeaway that you hope and pray everyone today that was listening keeps forefront of their mind when it comes to security?
Absolutely good point of Jenna of what she made is, there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of people who have great experience in this industry. Utilize that. I tell a lot of clients, don't be the test dummy for a security integrator. Make sure that they've already done it. Ask for references, because that's crucial. That's something that could make or break your business. If you have everything built out and you think everything is good, you have the inspection done, and then you find out you're missing half of your devices, that is extremely costly to go back and have to redo. So hiring the professionals that have already been there, done that, will give you great advice and steer you in the right direction.
And Anthony, what's your one takeaway for everyone today?
Similar to what Haley said, just make sure you're working with experienced professionals in cannabis. When it comes to construction engineering, you have to work with architects initially up front who have experience with, especially cultivation facilities, because there's a certain process flow, right? Veg, flower, drying, whatever the case may be, and you have to understand that you're not trying to, or you're trying to limit different issues that could float between rooms. So it's very specialized, and then going further into engineering, making sure that your HVAC, especially your HVAC engineer, understands cultivation. If they got lab experience, that's even better, because cultivation is pretty much like a big lab. So just get very competent AEC teams.
Thank you. And Jeffrey, what is your one thing that you want everyone to keep in mind when it comes to legalities of this industry?
Yeah, I would. I don't know that it's one thing to think of. Is just take a deep breath, right? I mean, I know we're all super excited about cannabis, and cannabis is awesome, but this is opening a business in a regulated market. Like, people have been opening businesses in regulated markets all over the United States forever. So this is doable. This is not some type of magic pixie fairy dust where we haven't done this thing again. I get the substance is a little different. It is cannabis, and we're all super excited about it, but this is going to be a regulated industry like any other regulated industry we have. We have processes and procedures that we've done for every other regulated industry we have around getting licenses and running these businesses. So this is no different than what we've done in any other situation, just because the substance is a little different. So take a deep breath, work with your experts. This is all very doable. It's just like running any other business. You got a regulator that's going to tell you some things to do. You want to be friends with your regulator. You want to do what they do, but it's not like this is sorcery or magic. This is like running any other regulated business in the United States. It just so happens we're going to be the first people to do it here in the state of New York here very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And Daryn, what key knowledge do you want to keep people's minds when it comes to real estate?
I mean, well, I would just echo everyone else. Be very strategic in the partnerships and the teams that you craft, and be very deliberate in everything that you do. And then specifically for New York, I think the CAURD program has a lot of pros. I think the two biggest things in in cannabis is two biggest issues is access to capital and acquiring real estate. So if you do, meet those requirements, I would say go for it, because you're going to have a slightly better chance doing that than starting from the ground up. And that's it.
So that first to market is always a beautiful thing to be able to acquire. And Grant.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the biggest thing I'd say, especially to those that are going under the general applicant piece of this and not under the CAURD, is to start really preparing now. You don't want to be rushing as soon as these applications come out. Prepare your team, start preparing when it comes from investment standpoint. start looking at the areas in which you want to run this business and hiring different pieces, whether that's your architect, your application consultant, or whoever you're having write this, or your legal advice. So you want to get those pieces in play now and not be scrambling, because 30 days, 60 days is not enough time to do really well and complete a very strong competitive application. So the more time that you have when you go through this process is going to be in your best interest and put you in the position to actually be awarded a license. And wrap this up then. So thank you everybody for joining today. We really appreciate it as part of the CLE team and as part of the partners that have joined us today. Thank you so much, and we hope that you guys were able to get some value out of our discussion today.